Welcome everyone to our Table Talk Thursday, focusing on the aftermath of COVID and addressing the inequities in education. My name is Kelly Sutton. I am the countywide chair for YLU, and I'll be your host and moderator for this panel discussion. Before we introduce our panel, I wanted to do a few housekeeping rules. Please make sure you keep your camera and microphones on mute. Utilize the chat box as we go along. If you have questions that you'd like me to ask the panel, please be respectful as you do that. And then also, this event is streaming live on social media, so we may have some folks giving us questions from there as well. And then lastly, we realize this is a lunch hour, so please take the time to eat while you enjoy this panel. And I hope you guys really enjoy what our panelists have to say. So wanted to give a quick plug for YLU in general. So YLU is a United Way affinity group. We have over 800 people and continue to grow. We're a group that wants to harness the energy of community leaders and impact lives to create a better community for all. YLU is open to all emerging leaders and community members in Forsyth County that want to make a difference. YLU Table Talk Thursdays began in May of 2020 out of conversations with members who wanted to be able to connect with leaders in the community. And so this is just a space for us to continue those conversations about many of the social issues and things just going on in our daily lives. And we're excited that this event is partnered with the Forsyth Promise that is United Way of Forsyth County initiative. And Charlotte Lindell, I believe, is on the call here today. She's the director of Forsyth Promise, and I want to hand it over to her to say a few words.
Thank you, Kelly. We are so excited to be partnering with Young Leaders United to discuss the impact of the pandemic and how our community is addressing inequities in education. To share a little bit about the Forsyth Promise, we're an education initiative of the United Way that works to ensure the success of every child from cradle to career through the development and alignment of community resources. Our core values are equity, inclusive stakeholder engagement, and data-driven decision-making. We provide the cradle to career collective impact framework for community stakeholders to work towards improved educational outcomes for all children and students in Forsyth County. We just recently released our 2020 Community Education Report, and I invite each of you to go to the United Way of Forsyth County's website to review it. Again, thank you for being here, and we are excited to be partnering with Young Leaders United for this amazing event. I'll turn it back over to you, Kelly.
Thanks, Charlotte. We also want to recognize the Women's Leadership Council and Tocqueville Leadership Society members that are joining us today. And also shout out to Greater Winston-Salem Incorporated, Winston Under 40, and the Greater Greensboro United Way YLU that are also joining us today. So first up, we're going to introduce our esteemed panel. So first of all, we have Mr. Alex Bohannon, who's a member of the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Board of Education representing District 1. As one of the youngest people to ever serve on the board, and as the youngest elected official in Forsyth County, he understands the importance of being inclusive of diverse perspectives. In addition to serving on the Board of Education, Alex currently serves on the advisory board for Read, Write, and Spell. Welcome, Alex. Second up, we have Ms. Chris Gentry. She is the director of the Family Support Network at the Centers for Exceptional Children. This program offers support services to families who have children with disabilities and special healthcare needs. Chris has over 30 years of experience serving families. She is passionate about helping families access needed support, information, and community resources to help their families thrive. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Next is Superintendent Tricia McManus. She's the superintendent of Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, graduated from the University of South Florida with a bachelor's degree in elementary education and a master's degree in educational leadership, and served as an educator in Hillsborough County Public Schools for 30 years. In June of 2020, she began serving as the deputy superintendent of Winston-Salem Forsyth Schools And on February 23rd of 2021, the Board of Education officially named her the 8th Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools Superintendent. Welcome, Superintendent McManus.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Dr. Janet Spriggs. She is the president of Forsyth Tech Community College and became the 7th president for Forsyth Technical Community College on January 1st of 2019. Prior to joining Forsyth Tech, she served 7 years in various executive leadership roles at Rowan Cabarrus Community College and 15 years as an executive leader at Carteret Community College, giving her more than 24 years of service in the North Carolina community college system. Welcome, Dr. Spriggs.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you all for being here with us today. I'm going to start out with a quick opening question that will go to all 4 of you. So we'll keep it short and sweet for the first questions, and then we'll dive into some specific to your areas of interest. So my opening question for all of you is, what are 2 words that would describe the COVID-19 pandemic as it relates to your work? So we can go in reverse order if that's helpful, starting with Dr. Spriggs.
Okay. Oops. I wanted to make sure I had my mic unmuted. Sorry for that technical difficulty, Kelly. So the 2 words that I chose are different boats. I think that what I learned early on as the pandemic started way back over a year ago now was that while we were all in this storm together, this COVID-19 storm together, we also were all in very different boats. The boat that I was in was protecting me well from so much, and the boats that some of my students were in were not very seaworthy. And so the experiences that so many people were having were so different depending on what kind of boat we had. And I think that related so much to the work that we do here at Forsyth Tech, because we were trying to keep our students in boats that would keep them afloat during this pandemic and that would allow them to stay on track and not lose momentum. And that became very difficult depending on, their personal situation.
Thanks for that. Superintendent McManus, would you like to go next?
So I would say innovative thinking are probably my 2 words, just because the year has posed many challenges and has caused us to think outside the box on how to solve those and think of unique ways to address different issues as they've arisen. So I would say innovative thinking. Thank you.
Ms. Gentry.
Yes, the 2 words I chose were frightening and disproportionate. As a professional working with families who have children with disabilities, many of our families were very, very concerned about the health of their children's, their well-being, emotional well-being, and also just the fact that individuals with disabilities are not often represented well and even thought of sometimes when we think of minorities, and they are the largest minority group. So we often are left out of the conversation and disproportionately affected.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Bohannon.
So the 2 words I would think of would probably be radically revealing. And I say that because when we understand inequities that have sort of been perpetuated over time within an American context, right? A lot of the inequities that are present right now were already present prior to the pandemic. It's just that the pandemic exacerbated them and then revealed them to a lot of people and really forced a lot of institutions to really have to grapple with them in new and innovative ways, right? So we already, across all different, in the educational context, across, all sort of the lines in terms of quality of life, there were disproportionalities already. And then the pandemic showed up and then it was like, wow, I think some people were surprised. Others just, I think, were, who already were aware, were just like, we just have to kind of keep pushing and we have to work even harder now. So those are the 2 words that I would choose.
That's great. Thank you guys for for the opening there. So we're going to go around and ask you each a couple of questions. We'll probably do one question each the first time around, and we'll see what we have time for as we go back through. But I'd like to start first with Ms. Gentry. What does the classroom look like now for your students due to the pandemic?
Well, I am working in a school, but I am not in a classroom. I'm doing the support for families. But what I've seen in the classrooms and in the schools that I've worked with most closely is that they're at about 60% capacity. We have a lot of students enrolled, but still doing remote education. We have lots of students doing the virtual academy itself, which is different than the remote learning. But what I've seen in the classrooms is teachers working so very hard to make sure that the needs of their students are met, specifically students with disabilities. We know that one size fits all has never worked for individualized education. And certainly they have had to be very, very creative in providing the supports and academic resources for their students during this time. Above and beyond is what I've seen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. Superintendent McManus, we know that the pandemic has about half of the children in third grade that were not at reading level. Now that students have missed almost a full academic year in the classroom, we can only assume that children have fallen even further behind. So how, as educators, do you begin to address this? And do you go back to the same methods that you had before, or is this a new normal?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kelly. So yes, before the pandemic, the district is at 51% of students reading on grade level in third grade. Our goal is to get to 90%, which I have no doubt that we will get there. We know how to do it. And so now it's about doing it. And so I will say that, we're not going to go back to business as usual, but when you think about pre-pandemic and then even into this school year, we've rolled out this school year not only the remote learning with Canvas and other platforms and new innovative strategies to reach the remote learner, but we also at the same time this year rolled out an entire new reading curriculum in K-3. And 10 years prior to that, there was not a guaranteed and viable curriculum for reading. People were on their own to find resources. And so this is the first year of the implementation of the Wonders curriculum. And I do know that that has been challenging alongside of learning Canvas and learning so many other things this year for teachers, and they have done amazing work. But I say that because even Hegarty, which is a foundations in phonemic awareness and phonics, that is a new program that was started and was adopted. And so and also the science of teaching reading is training that was started and it's continuing to happen. And so are we going to go back to business as usual? No, we're actually going to go back to the business that actually is known to work and that is research-based and do it with fidelity. That is what we have to do. And so when you think about our literacy classrooms, without a guaranteed and viable curriculum in the hands of teachers and students, you cannot make progress. You have to have a standard. We have to have a standard across every classroom. And then you can differentiate and provide the personalized one-on-one, because exactly what Chris said, there is no one size fits all. We have to meet the different needs of each of our learners. We have new data systems in place and new reading assessments. There is so much that rolled out this year that when we can do it with complete fidelity this fall, provide the coaching, especially in some of our most underperforming schools, to actually implement the science of reading with fidelity every day and use these strong resources, we will start to see growth and outcomes. Now, that does not even include small group reading instruction, tutorials, and all the other things that we do as a system. So again, it is not business as usual. It's actually doing the business that is research-based, that is known to work in education, and now doing it with fidelity at the highest levels for our students.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we've learned so much over this pandemic. We should not go back to business as usual. There's been so many learnings, tons of innovation. I can't remember who said that earlier, but just becoming innovative throughout this time. I want to go over to Mr. Bohannon. As a school board member, can you give us an aerial view of the challenges that parents have shared with you specifically in District 1 as it relates to the remote learning, access, reading level, all of those things that we just discussed?
Sure. So I would say that, understanding just geographically, the District 1 is housed and is in the center of the county, which comprises the city center, and that's where a lot of poverty is concentrated, right? And so when you think about it, even if you don't necessarily come from a family from a sort of lower socioeconomic background, parents have from the beginning had to contend with balancing their work and making sure that their children get the education that they deserve, virtually. And a lot of times that's difficult. And when you think about it, especially if your family looks a little bit different from what we understand to be the sort of nuclear family, right? We have grandparents that are the primary guardians for children. We have a lot of different, family structures. And so what that does is, that's made it difficult for a lot of minoritized populations as school and instruction has been virtual. As we've begun to transition back into school, that's something that one of the things that I'm hearing that a lot of parents are grateful for. I think at the very beginning, you also have to add the anxiety around the virus, right? And making sure that as we're returning, that everything is safe and that children are safe. And the other piece I think is that I think parents have had to take on an additional role, right? So parents already are the advocates, they're the support system, but then they're kind of like they've been like the co-teachers, right? And having to learn and all of these new systems with their children sometimes. So it's certainly been very difficult, but I think, one of the very interesting things about going through something as sort of a collective community. I know Dr. Spriggs talked about everybody being in a boat, but everybody's boat looks a little different, right? Some people are in yachts, some people are in canoes with holes in them, right? And so I think that, as we've tried to navigate this, we all have in some way or some form have had to adjust. And so to answer the question, I would say that, what I've been hearing from parents is that it's been difficult, right? But we're seeing now, the kind of light at the end of the tunnel coming out of the pandemic, but there are going to be a lot of residual effects that we are contending with now, especially as a board and with Superintendent McManus to try to mitigate some of the effects of the pandemic longer term.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's interesting to hear the parents' perspectives on all the things that have been implemented, all the innovation, as we just said. Like sometimes that comes with quite a learning curve, or the time is just not there to dedicate to learning those systems. So I'm sure everyone's excited to get back into schools and continue to learn. I'd like to switch gears from K through 12 to the community college level. So Dr. Spriggs, high school graduates are opting to delay enrollment to four-year universities, and community colleges are taking kind of the enrollment downswing as well. What strategy has the community college system activated to encourage recent grads to enroll at Forsyth Tech or any other community colleges?
Yes, thank you so much, Kelly. What a great question. I think that we have done a lot, both as a system in North Carolina. There are 58 community colleges, and while we all serve the unique communities that we are located in, we are also part of that large system, which I believe is the strongest system of community colleges in the nation. And so we've done a lot collectively. We have had opportunities to provide funding to help attract new students. We have some funding right now called GEAR money that is allowing us to offer scholarships to students in short-term workforce training development programs. We also have a lot of opportunities to have do things like waive fees for the coming year as our students are still trying to financially recover and get back on their feet. So there's been a lot of system-wide strategies, but also at the college at Forsyth Tech and at all of the colleges individually, we have done things like strengthened our recruitment strategies, worked hard to try to let graduates know who we are, why we are the best choice for them, what kinds of programs we offer, how those programs translate into livable wage career opportunities and pathways for them, how they can consider Forsyth Tech for their transfer college so that they can stay home and get a couple of years at a very affordable tuition cost, and then transfer to a university and have 2 years of college, so they only have 2 more years to go at the university level. And letting them know that when they choose that transfer option, they're going to be in class with instructors who are the same credentialed instructors that they would find at the university, again, for a fraction of the cost. So a large part of our strategy has been helping high school students and middle school students understand what the community college is, what we offer for them. For low-income students, helping them understand that college can be an option for them, because sometimes they don't even envision college as part of their future. We've also done a lot and we're working really hard to strengthen the already strong partnership that we have with the Winston-Salem Forsyth County school system, connecting with them more frequently and in expanded ways, so that together we are, working hand in hand to build that college-going culture for students, and again, help them with opportunities to test college out through our CCP programs, and just demonstrating for them, helping them plan, helping them dream about what their future could be, and then working together to build strategies on how to build a pathway that helps them achieve those dreams. So again, especially for those first generation students who don't have role models in their life, that can help them understand the future does have college as part, it can be part of their future, and helping them find ways to afford college and make it seamless, and just the expectation that they can have college as part of their future.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Some students are now realizing that community college might be their best choice up front, and instead of jumping into a 4-year university where they might get turned around and not sure what they want to do, they kind of get to test it out, get some of these gen eds under their belt, and then move on, or perhaps get a certification that will put them in a trade. I think that that's wonderful. I just wanted to mention again, for anyone that's on this call, you can go ahead and start putting some questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as we go through. So feel free, whenever you think of a question, pop it in there. All right, Ms. Gentry, I'd love to circle back with you. So you mentioned a lot about adapting classrooms to the medical and disability needs that the students might have, but how do you help the parents and caregivers address those medical needs if they're learning remotely? Like, what does that look like for you? Go ahead.
For a lot of our families, when the pandemic first started, like I mentioned at the beginning, the word was frightening, because families did not know how their child's medical needs would be putting them at greater risk for COVID-19. So a lot of our families immediately isolated. There were not medical professionals coming into the home like they normally were. There was not community support people coming into the home. So trying to access some of those resources that were available to them pre-pandemic were very, very challenging. As an example, some of our families, in fact, many families who have children with pretty significant disabilities, ended up becoming the medical caregivers for their children at home, without any additional assistance coming in, which put another level and another layer of caregiving on them, on top of already increased household needs, because everybody was home, and academic needs, and of course, special education needs. All of these things impacted the mental health of our families, as well as some of the physical health needs. So trying to get some of that care, certainly telehealth was immediately elevated to for a lot of our families to be able to see their doctors, to get medical information, and to not leave their homes. But also helping families get the protective equipment and supplies that they needed if they had to travel to a doctor was part of what we did. Connecting families with all kinds of community resources is our business. So like I said before, one size does not fit all. Each family's needs with their child's medical concerns were unique, and families needed different things. One of the things we've been able to do is put together a community Facebook page. It's closed, but specifically for families who have children with disabilities. So if there's a need for equipment or something that they can't have immediate access to through the formal service system, another family may be able to step up and help them with those needs. So we've seen families sharing all kinds of equipment, diapers, formulas, surgical gloves, medical gloves, and other supplies that might be needed to care for their child's medical conditions during this time. So that's one way, but connecting families with the community resources they need to make sure that their child's medical needs are addressed is just something we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, now that I think about it, the way you just described this as, or your role kind of as a connector between families and the resources that they may need. We got a question in the chat that I feel like relates to this, and maybe some of the other panelists can answer. The question is, can each of you touch on the equity in the school systems moving forward? So, you know, in your case, it deals with disabilities, but perhaps it has to do with equity of ethnicity, economic mobility, all of those things. So I'm wondering if each of you guys can kind of take a stab at answering that one as well.
I'll let somebody else start.
Yeah.
I can touch on the school system a little bit, and then Superintendent McManus can back me up. So I would say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is of course really close to my heart because of my own lived experience, but also because it's my professional area, you know, where my subject matter expertise is in. And the reason why I say diversity, equity, and inclusion is because I view all three as essential, right? We talk a lot of times about equity. So just sort of the way my mind works is that I think about diversity in terms of people, composition, of the people who are in the room, inclusion as perspective, right? The valuing of the voices in the room, and then equity as practices, right? So we want to have equitable practices embedded into the very marrow of our institution, right? And so that means that from the district level, from the board, as well as superintendent and our senior staff, all the way down to cultural competent interactions with students and culturally relevant pedagogical practices in the classroom, right? So over the past few years, what we've done is we've hired an executive director for equity and access, Dr. Effie McMillan. She's done a fantastic job. We have we have an equity plan within the district. We are working all the time to make sure that we are attentive and listening to various marginalized and minoritized populations about their needs. I saw in the chat that there's a question around the LGBTQ identity, which I don't want to jump ahead of you, but I would say that what I always like to tell people is that there's diversity means a lot of different things. I know that typically when we talk about diversity, what is at the forefront a lot of times is racial and ethnic diversity. But again, as Ms. Gentry said, there's diversity around ability, there's diversity around gender, there's diversity around socioeconomic status, there's diversity around sexual orientation. And so there are lots of different areas. And so there are lots of those identities are, you know, a lot of our students, faculty and staff both have a variety of different identities. And so it's our job, and it is our hope to make sure that the varying needs of those communities are met. And we try to be extremely intentional about that. Just, I think yesterday or the day before, I received an email that, you know, that we now are, in terms of our staff, are really being intentional about wellness and mental health, making sure that we're addressing a lot of those needs. And we also have We also have been extremely intentional in understanding that, you know, everybody's been affected by the pandemic, and as we're moving forward, we want to make sure that, you know, in our practices, we are addressing the individual needs of diverse populations. And so I know that's kind of a general overview. The superintendent, I'm sure, can be a little bit more specific.
Yeah, I'll be happy to jump in. Thank you, Alex. So, you know, to be a leader of equity, you have to view equity as everything you do and everything you approach every day. It can't be a standalone. And although in our strategic plan, we have a specific goal around equity, and that involves closing achievement gaps, making sure that our students have access to rigorous coursework, have equitable access, and that, you know, it involves a lot of things, but not only is it goal 2, but it is interwoven through all 5 of our strategic plan goals. And to just give some specific examples around how we're addressing equity, one way is through resource equity, and that is about how we're resourcing schools. And so schools that have more readers that are less than proficient, will have more resources and have more, and this is not only just staffing, but it's actually support and funding. When we think about access to advanced coursework, when you look at our data around students that are in advanced placement classes, dual enrollment, and other rigorous courses, our students of color are the least represented. And so one of our efforts right now is getting more students of color in courses that are going to challenge them and get them ready for that next phase of life post high school. And then providing the supports. We're adding AVID to provide supports to students so that they can be successful in their advanced placement coursework. We cannot have practice that hold kids back. That's what causes the inequity. When it comes to our approach to summer programming this summer and just our approach in general with making up lost time, we are not focused on remediation. You cannot remediate kids to death because you never close the gap. We are focused on acceleration, and that is the language that we're using. We cannot go back and take kids even further back. It's about continuously accelerating. And then when it comes to other things that are more exclusionary in nature, like our discipline practices, we are about to jump into a whole new focus on our code of conduct and changing that so it does not penalize our students of color. And we're about to do a big deep dive as an entire community and district in systematizing approaches that will actually lead to less exclusionary practices, hopefully none. And when I say that, I'm talking about suspensions. And so there are very specific practices. We are also, as a senior team, you know, the idea of equity and racial equity, it does have to start at the top of an organization because yes, grassroots is critical, but you've got to set the tone from the top down. We've been involved in anti-racism training, implicit bias training, and that will continue from senior team to principals to other leaders, and then with teachers. Our site-based folks are on board with change. They want to see these changes occur so that we can level the playing field and so that we can close achievement gaps. And so now it's about actually as a system, creating the structures that will be sustainable over time. Again, equity is not a buzzword in our district. Equity is a way of life and the lens we look through as we think about everything we do.
Thank you. That was an excellent answer.
Yeah, it was. I kind of hate to follow you, Tricia, but I must because that was wonderful from both Alex and Tricia. Everything that you said, I wholeheartedly agree with and affirm. And the only thing that I can add is that at Forsyth Tech, equity is part of who we are. It is built into our DNA. When I first came here and was talking with the senior team and the faculty and staff, and we were building our shared vision and our strategic plan, equity was at the center of all of that work. We did not want to have it just a buzzword, as Tricia said, or have it bolted on to what we were doing. It needed to be part of our DNA and built into the culture and to who we were. I think that the pandemic and the and other things around recognizing racist behavior that has happened within our country over the past year, and getting to a place where we're free to, or not free, but we're willing to be courageous enough to say systemic racism exists, and we're going to focus on ferreting it out of our practices and our processes and our structures and our systems. And Tricia talked a lot about that, being willing to accept that you do have to change your policies. You do have to look at your processes and your systems and your structures and look at them through an equity lens, but also look at them in a way that allows you to create something that truly does create a culture where everyone belongs and where everyone is treated equitably. So at Forsyth Tech, we created an equity statement as part of our strategic plan. It was the college's first equity statement that says that at Forsyth Tech, equity is grounded in a culture of belonging, and that every learner is going to have what they need to be successful here at Forsyth Tech. It's about not just saying that everyone belongs, but that creating both in the classroom and outside the classroom places or a space, an environment, a culture where that's truly the case, and where every student that walks through the door feels that and knows that. And there are not policies and practices that are in place that are inequitable for any student or any group of students. So we've done a lot of work around looking at our policies. We've had 2 amazing consultants over the past 2 years. We created a vice president level position. In fact, I think I saw Dr. Jewel Cherry on this call, and Dr. Cherry was our first ever vice president for equity and inclusion before she retired at the end of last year. We elevated that work to the highest level, to the executive leadership team. We have a council for equity, belonging, and inclusion. We have an equity plan. We're definitely lowering achievement gaps, eradicating achievement gaps, and really taking an approach that it's front and center. It has to be, again, a part of everything that we are doing in a very prominent way. We're looking at, in the classroom, multicultural competence in teaching. Being willing to say that some things that we do around testing and grading are inequitable. And so I think that, our philosophy is to see with clear eyes and change with open minds.
Excellent.
The only thing I would add to that from my perspective is thinking about students with disabilities, that inclusive practices are enormous as far as our communities and our schools go. For people with disabilities of any age, it has definitely not been common practice to include people with disabilities in the general population. But looking at education, just looking for those opportunities for every student who has any type of a special need to be included as much as possible in the general education curriculum. Certainly that's the focus of their individual education programs, and just making it as easy as possible for teachers to do that. It's very challenging to bring students with disabilities into the general education curriculum classes. They need more supports often. There's behavior issues. So making sure that we're providing the supports that our classroom teachers need to be able to do that for students with disabilities is huge moving forward.
Yeah, thank you all for your thoughtful answers there. I think it's really great that, we're acknowledging the history that we have that might have been inequities that stem from practices that have been in place for a long, long time, and taking a conscious effort to turn that around. I loved Superintendent McManus, what you said about acceleration instead of focusing on remediation. That makes such a difference when you expect high things from students and you give them the tools to succeed. So all of what you said, all 4 of you, was excellent in addressing many different parts of equity and how you can build that into your DNA going forward. So we have another question in the chat, and not everybody needs to answer, but if someone has some thoughts here, Andy Higler asked about how have psychological services, mental health services at Forsyth Tech, the school system, worked to address the mental health effects on students and or staff that stem from the pandemic?
Well, I'll really quickly share that mental health, and especially in light of the isolation that so many of our students experienced during COVID, has been a significant concern. We were concerned with mental health with our students before COVID, and that's only been exacerbated by the pandemic. So we have put in place as a state an opportunity for a student assistance program, which is essentially free services for any of our students as well as any member of their family to be able to access counseling services, to be able to access legal services, just a plethora of opportunities for access to the types of services they need, particularly with an emphasis on psychological well-being. We also have hired additional counselors. We had some of our federal stimulus money and money that we received from the state. We have used that to hire counselors and to have them here on campus and available for our students. We've put in place a lot of opportunities both in the classroom and outside the classroom also for students to have the opportunity to tell us, to let us know, to engage with us, and for us to be intrusive with them, to ask, are you doing okay, and to reach out and try to stay connected and engaged with students, and to be able to see when there's something going on that maybe we need to refer them to for additional support or counseling or services like that.
I will I will just add something from the school district's perspective. So, social emotional supports. I will tell you one of the biggest concerns for many families, and I know there'll be more questions about families and what parents have needed or asked for. A lot of the feedback this year was around parents wanting their kids back in school because they were so concerned with what they were seeing with their students' emotional health and mental health, and the isolation that has occurred with kids not being with their peers until they were back in school has caused a lot of issues. And so I will tell you, our student services team does amazing work, and it is a huge factor in the mental health supports that are provided for our students. We've got, school counselors, social workers, and school psychologists that have all, they've always been there, but they've really worked hard this year to just check in and connect with students based on teacher referrals and what they're seeing in their classes. As students maybe started having less of attendance or not turning cameras on or not being participatory, and any kind of red flags coming up, these teams were on site to respond and to reach out to families. And we called them CARES team this year, but this is the work that our student services do all of the time. But then we added another layer to the CARES team, and that was at the district level. And basically, if there were cases where we were really concerned about kids or their families, that could be elevated, and the school team just did not feel like they were being successful, that could be elevated to a district CARES team. District CARES team visited over 3,000 homes this year to touch base with families and see if they had what they needed. Making sure that our families have food this year, no matter what, even on the weekends, has been a priority. And so, but the mental health, again, we've provided schools and leaders and teachers with a lot of resources this year around how to actually embed SEL in classrooms. So it's almost like a tiered approach. We've got to do it through our lessons. Kids are not going to learn if they don't feel safe and included. And so you can't just teach your content. You've got to embed it. And so the first layer is during your classroom lessons. The second layer are through these other resources that are on site that can meet with students. And our community in general is so rich with mental health supports. And so I know, a lot of referrals have been made this year to outside providers as well. With staff, similar to what Dr. Spriggs said, we have an amazing EYP program that is underutilized, and it is free counseling services up to, I believe, 6 sessions for our employees and other resources outside of the mental health counseling. But anyway, this is a big priority for us and will continue to be a priority for us, even as we think about our ESSER funding, ESSER dollars coming. How can we do even more to address what will be the aftermath? Because sometimes mental health, it doesn't pop up quickly, but it can be things that will show up down the road. And so we have to this will be a priority right alongside with the academic priority as well.
I'll add one comment just from a community partner perspective, is that we've had a lot of families who the parents needed some counseling. They were under great stress and lots of tension in the homes. Kids with special needs are very difficult to care for. But what we found was that most of our community counselors were getting maxed out as well. And if you're starting to look for a counselor and you have to search for a provider who accepts Medicaid, who will do telehealth, or if you want in person, and you start narrowing that field, we found a lot of families were not able to access the community supports that they really needed during this time. I did see lots of great impact from the CARES team in the schools. So kudos to that change.
That's great. Does anyone else have questions or comments on that topic? I don't want to skip over any questions. I do know Mr. Bohannon touched on this a little bit, but we did have a question from Facebook about public schools and the relation with LGBTQ folks, and also incorporating that into history classes or talking about that in sex ed classes. So I wanted to give an opportunity to touch on that briefly if anyone else has a comment about that.
I will say that one of our, and this is a touching point for me, because we just lost one of our amazing educators in our district, whose entire body of work over all of her years has really been ensuring that we have a social studies curriculum that is inclusive of all. And she's worked, and this is Rebecca McKnight, and we just lost her. And but this has been her mission, both at the state level and at the district level, is ensuring that all of our stakeholders, all of our students, all of our families are represented in what we're teaching and have a voice. And so I don't have a ton of specifics, and I wish I did. And this is something I will get more specifics around, because I don't like to, I like to kind of get into the specifics when I speak, but I will find out more about exactly what we're doing. I do know the other thing that's been very important to us is to have student voice be a priority in our schools. And so having student groups created in schools to have a voice, and that is all students, and all students being represented. And that includes our LGBTQ, any students in the LGBTQ community. So anyway, I will get more specifics, but I will tell you that an inclusive curriculum is something that's been very important to our district, especially in the last couple of years.
Thanks for sharing that. I think we have time for a couple more questions, but I had one specifically for Ms. Gentry. Someone asked, the Forsyth County Board of Commissioners has ended the contract with Cardinal Innovations. How will that impact the work being done with the Center of Exceptional Children?
Well, I will say that that's in process. It hasn't actually been terminated yet, but it is going to have a great impact on families in our community who are trying to access resources. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar, but there's a very large waiting list for community supports for people with disabilities, up to 10 years, sometimes more. And when that change occurs, if it does, and they have voted to start the process to disengage with Cardinal. So families who are trying to access services now are not only, bumping up against services not being available now. In the middle of that, they're going to change providers, which will cause a little bit more turmoil for families, because there'll be a whole nother organization that they'll have to interact with. So super challenging time for a lot of our families. That is a service that impacts students that have intellectual disabilities as well as developmental disabilities, and who may not be able to have their activities of daily living done as independently as a typically developing student would. So yes, that's going to be quite a challenge for a lot of our families.
Great, thanks for sharing. We have one last question and then we can wrap up. Someone asked, will any of the funds our city has received from the American Rescue Plan go towards any of the programs that we've discussed on this call?
So I can take that one. So the school district is going to receive its own separate set of dollars from the American Rescue Plan. And we are in the process right now of developing a plan to for those funds, but also to ensure that the community is involved in how we're spending those funds. I know that the city is already involved in that process and soliciting feedback from the community, but those funds are really separate pots. Now, that's not to say that the city may not decide to use some of those funds for that purpose, but that's sort of an internal thing that the city will do. We as a school district will have our own separate process for that. And also, it's really important to note, because a lot of times when people read that, the school system or the city or the county are going to receive a bunch of funds, there are very, very explicit requirements for how we have to spend that money. We have to actually submit a plan for how we spend that money. We just don't get it, and we have to get that plan approved. And there are restrictions. So we have to make sure that the use of the funds are tailored to the requirements that are provided to us by the federal government. And so to answer the question, the city may choose to use some of their funds to mitigate some of the effects of the pandemic, but we, the district, are certainly going to use our funds for that purpose.
Thanks. And as we wrap up, I wanted to ask one final question to everyone, and we'll keep it super, super short. But I just wanted to ask, what gives you hope right now going into the future based on everything that we've talked about today? So maybe like a one sentence or a phrase that makes you feel hope.
I think I'm hopeful for our population because we've all of a sudden seen that things can be done that have been sort of eliminated from conversations in the past, that we can access interactive opportunities online with teachers and health providers and grocery stores. So I think those are all things that we're going to see stay in place in the future and make a better quality of life for all of us.
I will go next. I believe that if we were able to figure out in this last year how to continue educating through a pandemic, how to bring the community together with resilience and get through this, then we can figure out how to get every kid to read on grade level by 3rd grade. So I will say we've got so much great community spirit. We have such great human spirit in our community, and so I'm very hopeful for what's to come.
And I will say the same thing. I echo what Chris and Tricia have said. I am hopeful for the future because we've been through this storm and we've come out on the other side of it tighter as a community and more together and more in sync. And I think I've seen and witnessed, I already knew our students were amazingly resilient, but I have seen a level of resilience that I didn't even anticipate or know was there. I also think that we've learned that there are inequities, and we've learned to face that again, to see with clear eyes and to be willing to confront it, and not just talk about ways that we can be more equitable and create practices that do create that culture of belonging for all students, but rather we're actually now taking action to make those changes. And we've learned how not to be afraid to take action perhaps more quickly as a result of the pandemic. That's very helpful for me.
So I would say that when you first asked the question, the first word that popped into my head was resilience. But as I'm sort of thinking about it, marginalized and minoritized populations, just by way of their lived experience, are required to be resilient, right? Prior to this pandemic, there were varying communities who just by, every single their day waking up, they're required to have some level of resilience because, when life sort of happens and it has its twists and turns, you're required in order to be able to continue on, you're required to be resilient. But what makes me excited about the future is that I believe what I've seen is a collective resilience in our community that's been built. And so as we're continuing to really work together, we now are, sort of aligned really well to continue this work. And so I think that moving forward, we'll be able to really take on the challenge because we all understand the importance of really getting down and getting our hands dirty and doing the work moving forward, and the importance of working together to do that, not doing that in silos, but to really build bridges with all of our community partners who are really with us on this journey.
Great. And I know we're over time right now, but I wanted to thank all 4 of you for participating in today's panel. It has been so interesting and really insightful, so I hope everyone got something out of it. And just one last quick plug for YLU. We partner with the United Way, or we're part of the United Way, and really focusing on these emerging leaders in the community. And to be part of YLU, you donate $250 a year, and that goes to all of these things that we've just discussed, all the partnerships that we've discussed that United Way does. And then also the Forsyth Promise Community Education Report is out on the Forsyth United Way website. So if you're interested in reading more about that, you can go out there. But as always, thank you for joining us. Thanks to our panelists, and I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day.